So I'm disappointed that the Biden administration dithered such that they couldn't fulfill the terms of the Doha Agreement and withdraw by May 1st. I think that would have been the best policy. However, I would say that this is the right approach, right? It is right for the United States to withdraw from Afghanistan. It's good policy. It's in our national interest to leave. And so I do applaud the president for making this decision, especially given how many people in Washington, in the foreign policy establishment and in the government don't want us to leave Afghanistan. In fact, many think that we should stay there until certain conditions are met, or even indefinitely, along the lines of a South Korea or Germany. And I think those longer span approaches would not be in our interests. In fact, would be contrary to them. And I think that this is the best approach going forward among the ones that are possible now that we've essentially blown through the ability to meet that deadline. Well, I think that advocates of withdrawing from some of our forever wars or endless wars always have to be careful that they actually won't end. I mean, we've seen other instances in which we thought these wars were going to be, ended. We were going to see full troop withdrawals, whether that's Syria or Iraq, where we did get out and then went back in. So I think we always have to be wary. However, this feels real. It does feel as if the Biden administration is going to make good rather on their approach and that announcement, and that we will see a speedy and full withdrawal from Afghanistan. Now, I do worry about domestic and foreign spoilers. They could play a role here in trying to push the administration to backslide on his announcement. And so I do worry about those types of things, particularly if there's some type of exogenous shock or something that happens in terms of how our domestic politics are playing around this issue. But I do think that it's going to happen. I think that, for example, that the Taliban will try to avoid making this too painful for the United States as it leaves. I think it's in their interest to do that. The question is whether there'll be spoilers in Afghanistan that will try to create a situation in which it would cause the United States to maybe rethink that. I also, again, like I said, I worry about those who would continue to try to push here at home. But I think that those arguments have been effectively blunted, and that those will not be dispositive, whether it's the issues of conditions like women's rights, for example, or the arguments about counterterrorism. I think the president made that pretty clear. And again, I think it was a great announcement. I think he made a lot of fantastic points that really made it clear where the United States stands under this administration. And I think it was different than the things that we've oftentimes seen in the past. But I really would have liked us to have been at this point much earlier, especially because that would have been consistent with President Trump's agreement that he and Ambassador Khalilzad had worked so hard to conclude. I think our national interests dictate that we actually can play a much smaller role in the Middle East and have a much smaller footprint. It doesn't mean disengaging from the region entirely. Clearly, we should be engaged diplomatically and economically. I think there's a role for the military to play too, especially in terms of our naval capabilities in the Persian Gulf and in the Indian Ocean. But I do think that we can follow a policy that's more aligned with realism and restraint, right? Realism about the nature of the world, about the nature of the region, about what we can actually accomplish there, and restraint in how we use military power to meet the interests we do have. So I think that again, a shifting of our approach in that region is well overdue. We have domestic issues that require our attention, our energy, and our resources, as well as more pressing foreign policy needs. We need to better manage the rise of China, for example, and not be distracted by on-net negative interventions in places that really have a lot less strategic importance in kind of America's geostrategic kind of environment. I think the likely withdrawal of all American forces from Afghanistan tells us that we ought to think about how we got here and why, and the strategic logic of why we're leaving. And I think that leads us to rethink a lot of what we're trying to do in other parts of the Middle East, and asks us to think about what type of grand strategy will best make America safe, that will promote the conditions of our prosperity, and secure our liberal democratic values here at home. And I think that that calls upon ourselves to really rethink beyond the status quo that we've really embraced, I think too firmly and without questioning the assumptions and arguments behind them over the last 20 to 30 years. So I look forward to the withdrawal of all troops from Afghanistan, and then thinking about what next and how we might reshape our grand strategy that's more consistent with the challenges of 2021 and the years to follow. And I think that our national interests need to be at the fore. What are they? What are the things worth fighting for and dying for? What are the things worth spending treasure on? Versus what are the things that we can rely on allies or partners, or simply ignore because it really doesn't touch on vital interests. And I think the problem in many ways of how Washington has typically thought about international politics is that too often they think that almost anything is connected to our interests, as if there's a seamless web of interests, when in fact that is not the case. And the United States can effectively do triage among the things that we need to do for our interests, the things that would be useful to do perhaps after a cost-benefit analysis, and those things that we can simply ignore.